Would you consider a pardon for Michael Flynn?
I don't want to talk about pardons for Michael Flynn yet. We'll see what happens. Let's see. I can say this. When you look at what's gone on with the FBI and with the Justice Department, people are very, very angry. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Donald Trump would not rule out a pardon for his felonious former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, even as he continued to impugn the reputation of the agency that caught Flynn in a lie. White House lawyer Ty Cobb quickly went on damage control after Trump's statement, telling The Hill in an email, quote, "No, there is no consideration at the White House of pardoning Michael Flynn." Trump dangled the possibility of a pardon as Flynn's cooperation with Robert Mueller moves the Russia investigation ever closer to answering the questions swirling around Trump, including a big one he refused to answer on Friday.
Mr. President, will you...
Michael Flynn lied to the FBI. When did you find out?
What else is there? You know the answer. How many times has that question been asked?
Joining me now are two of the people responsible for prosecuting crimes in the Watergate scandal, Nick Ackerman and Jill Wine-Banks. And I want to start with you, Nick, on the question of what would be the practical legal consequences if Donald Trump were to pardon Michael Flynn?
Well, the practical consequences are that he wouldn't be charged with the crime, but he's already spilled his guts. He's already told Mueller everything he knows. And in addition to that, his cooperation agreement requires him to also speak to local and state officials. So I guarantee you that Mueller has already had Flynn speaking to the Attorney General of the state of New York's people who are doing this jointly with him, so that if somehow Mueller was disbanded and that group had to go, the state Attorney General could simply step in here and use state crimes as opposed to federal crimes.
They could prosecute Flynn. They could prosecute his son, who probably is in this deal. Are you assuming that immunity for Michael Flynn Jr. was in the deal?
I assume it was. It must have been. But, you know, the central crime here relates to the fact that a crime was committed when they hacked the Democratic National Committee for those emails. The only question that remains is who else was involved? Was the Trump campaign part of the conspiracy to get those emails out to throw the election to Donald Trump? And there are good laws in New York State that cover the exact same crimes. So if the president somehow thinks he's going to derail this investigation by getting rid of Mueller, he's in for a big surprise.
And Jill Wine-Banks, you know, I said on Hardball the other night that I really feel like this is almost Watergate, but rerun the way Roger Stone wishes that Watergate had been run, in terms of the coordination of the attacks on the prosecutors, the coordination of the attacks on the investigators, and Trump perhaps trying to get away with firing Bob Mueller. So let's talk about Mueller just for a moment. This was the Republican cohort of Trump defenders. They're sort of almost a self-appointed defense counsel for Donald Trump, sitting in Congress questioning, criticizing Bob Mueller and the FBI investigation. This is just from this week. Let's listen to several Republican members of Congress.
I call on my Republican colleagues to join me in calling for the firing of Bob Mueller.
This is disgusting, unaccountable bias, and there's no way that could not affect a person's work.
I think the public trust in this whole thing is gone.
We are now beginning to better understand the magnitude of this insider bias on Mr. Mueller's team.
So Jill Wine-Banks, do you see in that kind of talk the preparations being laid, the groundwork being laid to have Bob Mueller fired?
I see the ground being laid for that, and I see a real threat to democracy and the system of justice and to the rule of law. There was nothing really like that during Watergate. The Congress went about its investigation and never threatened the special prosecutor or the FBI in any way. We did make some specific efforts for the American people to know who we were so that they would trust us. We had interviews with the press, which is not normal for prosecutors, but our press officer felt that the American people needed to know who we were and that we were honest people and that we weren't out to get the president. And the fact that people have opinions does not make them biased. It's like being a juror. You can have an opinion, you just have to agree to set it aside and to follow the evidence wherever it takes you and to make your decision based on the evidence in the courtroom. And there's no reason why investigators and the prosecutors cannot do the same thing. They will put aside their opinions and they should be left alone even with having an opinion on the case.
And what you're talking about is not Bob Mueller, but the agent that was removed from the Russia probe, whose name is Strzok, and this was, Wall Street Journal has a report on Thursday that a review of the correspondence between this former FBI agent and his then girlfriend revealed that they had some negative things to say, not just about Donald Trump, but about Eric Holder, about Bernie Sanders. They had lots of things to say, but it's the Trump part of the conversation between this former FBI agent and his then girlfriend that were released, and I want to come to you on this, Nick, by the Department of Justice, because this is an interesting sort of turn here. You had the Department of Justice to investigate, Inspector General, according to Natasha Bertrand of Business Insider, said in a letter to House Judiciary that the department did not consult with the Office of Inspector General before sharing text messages from this FBI agent, who's now become a cause célèbre on the right, to say that this is the proof that the Mueller investigation is tainted, that there was no consultation with OIG before those messages were released. I want to have you listen to Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, on Wednesday, talking about the consultation that should have happened.
Are you aware of the IG rule, which says that material in an ongoing investigation cannot be released?
Yes, I appreciate that. No, when this inquiry came in from the Congress, we did consult with the Inspector General, and he determined that he had no objection to the release of the material. If he had, I can assure you I would not have authorized the release.
What do you make of the fact that you have a recused Attorney General overseeing a Department of Justice that releases the selected text messages of an FBI agent that were not, this was not during the time he was part of the investigation of Donald Trump, but releasing them in a way to bolster the case that the Mueller investigation is tainted?
I wouldn't necessarily impute bad motives to that it was done to bolster the case. The emails were going to be released anyway. They were being given to a congressional committee. I mean, the other point here is the content of those emails is no worse than what the Secretary of State, Donald Trump's own Secretary of State, has said about him.
That's true.
So I don't know what the big deal is about these emails.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked with hundreds of FBI agents in 10 years being a federal prosecutor. Never once did politics ever arise. I don't even know who these people voted for. Yeah. I just know that they are dedicated public officials who do their job, looking at the evidence and going with the evidence wherever it leads them.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, you know, to go back to Mueller for just a second, Jill, is that you have this sort of coordinated campaign, not just against the FBI. And it's extraordinary to hear Republicans who are angry that NFL players are kneeling in response to law enforcement killing, black men, women, and children, and who claim that Black Lives Matter hates the police, actively attacking the FBI and law enforcement, and Bob Mueller, who's a decorated Navy veteran in Vietnam and probably the most respected FBI director in U.S. history anyway. Hearing the way that they are attacking him is extraordinary. Let's listen to in May, back when Mueller was first appointed special prosecutor. This is how Republicans talked about him.
He is someone who's widely respected for his professionalism. He's going to conduct a fair and thorough investigation. Of that, I have no doubt.
You couldn't have picked a better man to do the job?
All of us that knew Director Mueller are very happy he's there.
So the Justice Department need to do their jobs independently, objectively, and thoroughly. And I believe the special counsel, which is Robert Mueller now, helps them do that.
And now this is how sort of state media on Fox has been attacking Mueller lately.
Another day, another story that exposes just how corrupt Robert Mueller's team are. Robert Mueller's team is hyper-partisan, anti-Trump, abusively biased, and many unethical.
I've never seen anything as corrupt, politically corrupt, as one special counsel, that of Robert Mueller.
There is a cleansing needed in our FBI and Department of Justice. It needs to be cleansed of individuals who should not just be fired, but who need to be taken out in handcuffs.
First Jill and then Nick. First of all, have you ever, Jill, heard anyone, let alone Republicans, talk this way about federal law enforcement and about someone like Robert Mueller?
Never have I heard anything like it, and it is clear evidence that the closer the trail of evidence gets to the president, the more vociferous the arguments against Mueller are. It has nothing to do with Mueller's integrity, his honesty, his lack of bias, and the prior support that they showed for him. It has to do with the fact that they know now, the Republicans know now, that the trail of evidence may implicate the president. When they thought that it would exonerate the president, they were fine. This is unprecedented in American history, and Americans should be very alarmed at the choice that may be made to fire Mueller. That has to be a red line.
And Nick, are we headed for a constitutional crisis if, in fact, Donald Trump, now that he's got the backing, the full backing of this sort of Politburo of Republicans that are like, whatever Trump wants, whatever he needs, we're here for it, and he's got Fox News whipping up his base to say that Mueller is essentially a criminal? Are we headed for a constitutional crisis if Donald Trump fires the guy?
Yeah, we very well could be. I mean, the cleansing really ought to take place at Fox News. I mean, that's where people ought to be fired for trying to undermine our legal and justice system. I mean, it is absolutely outrageous what they're doing. I mean, on one hand, all of the Republicans welcomed Robert Mueller's investigation, welcomed him. He's a lifelong Republican. He was a Republican appointee to the FBI. He was a Republican aide to a former Republican Attorney General. I mean, if anybody ought to be cleansed, it ought to be those very people you just played the clips from that are on Fox News, because their whole goal is to try and undermine our rule of law and our legal system.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same thing they did to Comey, who's heroic in the eyes of Republicans until he wasn't. And then now, if he's against Trump, he's essentially an enemy of the state. It's remarkable. Nick Ackerman, Jill Wine-Banks, thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And up next, Steve Bannon may have felt gutted this week. We'll tell you why after a quick break.